Hi, good afternoon. I'm going to go through the today's newsletter, just some bullet points here, and I've also put some bullet points in about trade and how and look at where the service industry and the manufacturing industry is, just to see in parallel how they're performing, because I think that's always nice to see. Some of the key things, I mean, this week is a bit of a busy week because obviously everybody just came back to normal. So I've cut out a few things and just to go through, and I've actually created some slides, which I think is sometimes easier. One of the challenges you have with anything with these is moving the pages, which is always the fun side of it. But what we're seeing, so some morning signals, early indicators show demand concentrating on fewer higher volume corridors, shifting its heads across the UK and trade lanes. So, I mean, what we're saying now is that we're seeing a lot of changes within the market. We've certainly seen it in the last couple of years and certainly in the last year. And has Brexit had a huge challenge in figures? It'll always have challenges because you've got to get used to trading in a different format. But it'll be interesting when you look at some data figures as where the wins and where the kind of the losses are, and don't always hear the nonsense that people constantly are telling us that there's no market, there's none of this, there's no market in the EU, etc. There'll always be a market. Yes, it's a little bit harder to trade. As long as you're doing everything you should be doing, you shouldn't have these kind of problems. So we're seeing a market demand concentration. We're seeing people looking at markets more, and this is why obviously we created the data intelligence, and that's where we're feeding that information from. Last night I spent a lot of time we're building the export builder at the moment. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, but we're getting there, and it's looking, it's doing a lot of things that I wanted it to do to make it as simple as possible for you. Because if you're like me, when you're using something, and there's nothing worse when you're trying something so simple, you can't even do something so simple because it's so confusing. So we've tried to create something that is very simple to use. I like simplicity. That's the key to anything. Not that I'm simple. It's just, it's just, some people might disagree. But I like data, but I like to explain it in a nice format. So again, business entering new markets about map customers' responsibilities. It's the key thing we see. We see it all the time. If we want to go into a new market, we want to export, we can export. We're exporting into a particular country, we want to go to this, and off we go. You need to do your research. You need to understand, when we talked about geopolitics yesterday, you need to understand the responsibilities and the challenges within the countries you're going into. We're seeing so many changes at the moment. I mean, trade flows, it shouldn't stop flowing, but you just got to make sure you have a responsibility to make sure that you're doing your tariffs, you're looking at your origins. This week, we're going to do a little video on origin trade over the centuries, and you can see how it's been going on for years. People change the origin, or people do things with the origin of the product because in a trade deal they can get a cheaper rate, or there's a perceived quality about a product. This is not something new. So when you hear about it, excuse me, when you hear about it a lot, it's been going on. I'm going to show you, or I'm going to present to you. You can see on our YouTube channel a little story on the years of the UK, not UK, sorry, the years of how origin has been mistreated in many ways, and how it's always an uphill challenge. So that's why customs and everybody else, they want to make sure that if there is money to be gained through duty, they're collecting it in the right, correct way. Because if somebody's not giving the right information, your importer could be receiving goods and not paying any duties. But what happens then when he gets an audit? If we have audits, they have audits in Europe and they have audits all around the world. We see some big cases around the world when we do part of the customs monthly. We do a customs get together for people all around the world, which is very well presented by Enrica, one of my friends in Lithuania. And you see the challenges, and sometimes I'm gobsmacked at some of the cases that are going on in some of the countries, and how companies have lost so much money in fines and everything else. So again, just these are the trigger points. Be conscious. Once you know this is the hardest part. When we talked about UK, I wanted, because you hear a lot about trade services and manufacturing, so you always hear that, trade's doing really well. And I wanted to just have a look and give you some figures because we get the data. So we're going to show you the data. So every day we're going to show you different data because we get it. That's what we've been working on for the last year to get all that data. It's all free. It's all available. We've managed to condense it around 192 countries, which is quite a challenge in itself, but it does give you some great information. We're seeing a fundamental shift going very much from manufacturing into the service industry. The UK are very strong in the service industry. And again, I've got some figures here to show you. But as a manufacturer, it's just been more complex. So as an exporter, it's been a little bit more complex. But again, I still, for the life of me, never understand why companies do not have somebody in the department who understands exporting or importing and understands customs and everything else. Plenty of training out there, plenty of support. Even, employ on a monthly basis a consultant. Not going to be people like me. You can use anybody. There's plenty of people out there who will look after your compliance, your customs. They will ultimately save you a fortune because you get one thing wrong and it can be very costly. I've had last year. I've had companies lose 10, 12, 15,000 pounds on one shipment. They could have employed somebody for £12,000 a year. Our service is £12,000 a year. Does it all for you? So these are the things to start thinking about. But again, we're creating the data hub for trade intelligence hub that should be able to help you at a lower price to help you go through these challenges. What we're seeing especially in the statistical shift, we're seeing how the UK captures value in the European markets and where we're seeing in service obviously now represents a really strong area. And what I wanted to do on that, what do we mean by services? Because people, I always assume, never assume is the old saying. What do we mean by services? Well, it's anything professional. My biggest contract so far will be for this year will obviously be a major bank here in the UK, but I'll be represented in other countries for the same bank. So I'll be doing a service. I'll also now just sign a contract with, I think, the eighth largest Indian company in the world. We'll be supporting them on the new supply chain system they're trying to bring into the UK on one of the products. That in itself, for me, I'm working internationally, so that's a service. It's professional business services. It's things like consulting, engineering, design, architecture, financial. We're still huge on financial. Don't let anybody kid you that it's disappeared and all the nonsense you hear on the news and everything else. It was actually an article yesterday. I was looking at that. I think 4 of the big players were going to move out of the city of London and they've decided to stay now. Why would you move from London? Yeah, I know it's a lot of people would say, well, you would, but it's still, I was in London over New Year, and it's an incredible city. It's so busy, so much going on there. Why you'd want to go from that is beyond me. And they've seen sense, and they're going to stay in the UK. Digital IT, IP services, intellectual property. You've got a lot of SaaS now. Obviously, my platform is sold around the world. So again, not just the UK. Transport, think about your logistics. They'll have agents all around the world. You'll have DHL, they'll have DHL you'll be sending services. It's all about service, isn't it? And that it's weird really because that's a service, but actually it's manufacturing embedded in there because they're normally moving goods from the UK or from outside of the UK into the UK. So again, we're seeing a lot of services. And why is services going? Well, a lot of people will say it's to do with paperwork. Maybe it is. Maybe it's to do with customs, and it's all to do with misunderstanding. Everybody, you can't ship, you can't do this, you can't do that. Of course you can. It's only a customs entry. And most of your freight forwarders and your brokers and lots of people around there will make sure your goods move. But it's up to you to make sure you do the correct paperwork and everything else. It's the reason it gets stopped. No reason. Yeah, I know EU's a lot harder because they don't make it easy. And remember, you're dealing with 26 members, so you're not dealing with one EU. You've got CBAM coming in, another challenge, another nonsense that's been introduced this year, which, I just sometimes shake my head of how they make trade so difficult to trade with the EU. Yet they want to trade, and I'll explain this in a minute, they want to trade with other countries nice and straightforward. Yet we, the UK and other countries, have to go through all the processes. Yet goods can come into the UK nice and easy because we make it as easy as possible for them. So, there's a real mismatch, and that's why we see a lot of changes. Just EU, UK. So I was going 2018 because obviously that was when we were booming just before COVID. You can see goods haven't really moved that much if you look at it. So 2025 is actually up, which is quite surprising. Services obviously is way up. It's stagnated, but considering everybody talks on LinkedIn and every other area that the EU's been a disaster for the UK since Brexit, the figures are not showing that. They're showing it's just stagnated. And I think it's stagnated because, again, there's a lot of misunderstanding. People got customs and everything else right, you'll see a huge increase there because it's on our doorstep. Why would the EU not buy from the UK? There's no reason why they won't do that. They're lazy in some way that they don't want to do the customs and everything else. They force DDP and other things on UK manufacturers who don't understand the system. So they don't want to lose a customer like me. I'm sales. I don't want to lose a customer, so I'll do everything I can to look after them. But actually, it's about understanding. People understand the process. It would be so much easier. And also, I think countries should put barriers in there that if you're importing from a country, there's no way somebody else should be paying the VAT in that country. It should be paid by the importer who's importing the goods. I just find it incredible because I can never get in my head is when they invoice them goods and they're putting VAT on it, but they're not paying VAT on it. So I'm always intrigued to know how that works. When we talk about DDP and taxes and everything else, it's just my observation. You don't have to take me full proof on that. But again, UK imports, it's surprising, isn't it? Somebody said, well, the EU is flying into the UK. The UK will always be a big importer, will always be a huge importer of goods coming into the UK because obviously over the years we've seen, our manufacturing decrease, but actually we're still number 8. We are increasing there. But why wouldn't you export to the UK? Nice and straightforward. You can postpone your VAT, you can do deferment accounts, you can do all these things that make it so much easier. We don't have the border challenges in the UK as you do when you send your goods over to the EU. So why wouldn't the UK increase on its imports from the EU? So it's nothing to do with, oh, it's better than anything. It's all to do with how customs and how transport and everything else moves around and flows. It's as simple as that. And you can see services, 2025, even the services have increased, as you can see coming in. Services imports rose from 110 to 170 billion. Goods imports rose from 200 to 310 billion. That 24% is a huge increase in it. It's a huge increase. If we go back and we look at goods exported, goods exports flat, but there's still plus 4.7%. So I have no idea why people keep saying it's been a disaster and everything else. It's been a disaster, but it's not had a huge, it's still increased. It's not decreased. And if you look at the service industry, why don't we look at the services? It's increased by 67%. So that shows you there's a market there. So why don't companies support the service industry? Why don't the UK support that? Because obviously there's a big increase of transport there. Sorry, big increase of services there to make it easier. Again, best performance. So we had a look through our data. Germany, France, and Netherlands. So we're seeing intellectual property license, digital services, and we know that. We know why for that, because a lot of companies have moved the bases over into Holland. Holland have been a real success story of this. We've made it very simple for companies to move. Lots of them why the government didn't fund or support businesses in the UK to just give them that few years of support rather than just losing them and losing a lot of trade that then went into the EU direct. Can be very frustrating, but at the end of the day, that's up to governments and how they do things. That's how it is. I don't beat about the bush. They made it so simple without really a care what they were thinking. It would have been easier to put $1 billion aside and fund UK manufacturing to get themselves used to trading from the UK, get used to doing the paperwork, got used to doing everything to make it so simple, and put pressure on the EU to do a digital system. And then we wouldn't have been in this, these crazy situations. But there's always winners and losers in this. Ireland Financial Services, technology platform, Spain, infrastructure and advising professional training, growing demand for UK governance frameworks and projects. So, there's a lot of good things what the UK does, but it's something we don't really think about from the service sector. And it's something that we should do. These markets value UK expertise, governance standards, and legal frameworks. We have very good, strong defence. We have good industries, good, strong industries, and we'd like to see that grow. Again, there's more support needed there from UK governments. Why this matters for business, manufacturing face high friction. I've just made some notes here. Regularity alignments and rules of origin create ongoing compliance. Again, get your origin, understand what your pain points are. Understand what's needed, understand CBAM, understand all these regularities, what are there, and licensing. And then once you understand that, you'll be fine. Protection on the margins and obviously compliance. You know, companies lose so much money on this. It's crazy. I never understand it. Look at your compliance. There's tools and everything there now to support you. AI has come a long way, and as long as you teach AI, you're not replacing it. You're not replacing anybody, but your expertise or my expertise is teaching AI how to do things and check things. So that there's lots of things you can do there, and use the trade hub. That's what it's there for. It'll be ready in the next few weeks. Again, physical goods, precision documentation and planning. Again, somebody who's in that department who knows that will make that easy. Stop doing X works and all this sort of silly stuff. Look at your Incoterms, look at your compliance, look at your documents, look at your invoicing, look at what's required, look at your regularities, what's required in them countries. Get an SOP in place on each country you're going into, and then it doesn't matter who's doing that, who's moving the goods, because if somebody doesn't know and then something happens and something gets stuck, there's a huge cost involved in there. Now your profit's been wiped out. Services scale faster, fewer border constraints, digital delivery. Growth depends on evidence, contracts, and data clarity. Contractual and intellectual property protection becomes primary risk. Service exports face different risk, obviously. Payment terms, IP protection, all these things are the challenges. And I just put on the reality check trade success, and it is about controls and intelligence, not optimization. So again, both goods and service sets must operate with rigorous planning and real-time market intelligence. Look at the intelligences there. It's available. We're getting it all. We're putting it all together for you. So again, contact us if you want more information on the intelligence. It's really good what it can do. Again, take action. I've just put some key things on here. Incorrect Incoterms, misdeclared values. Remember, whatever you're invoicing the customer is what you're invoicing, what you're paying customs on, or your importer's paying customs on. If your customer asks you to reduce the cost of the invoice, you do not, under any circumstances, do that. And another thing, if you're doing X works, how do you know what value they're putting on that customs declaration if you don't get a copy of it? Again, it triggers penalties. It's a traceability. It comes back to you. You have a responsibility. Again, missing origin. Again, don't just assume it's a UK origin because higher around the corner buys it. It's not always evident that it's a UK origin. You've got to get your suppliers' declarations, your supply chain exposure, all these things that you can do under your customs diagnostics checklist if you want to do it, or you can use our customs supply chain. IOSEP for £395 is probably the best investment you'll ever make because it will save you a fortune because it will give you that report, it will give you all the checklist, it will give you all the support you need. Unclear responsibilities. You're responsible, you're an exporter. If you're an importer, you're responsible here in the UK. So again, it's very important to understand that. That's why we've built the simplified, as I've said there. Diagnostics Hub, again, we've got the book club. We're doing the box with Mark Clemenson at the moment, Discover a simple metal container, revolutionize global trade and transfer the modern economy. Essential reading for anyone. I'm going to be doing a lot more in the book club. I've just redesigned how I'm going to do today's newsletter because I think it's more compact and it's better and I can discuss it a lot easier rather than swapping screens, etc. Thanks for listening. Have a good day and we'll see you tomorrow.